All right. Share my screen. Okay. All right. So yeah. So for this week we have a few things to do. The quiz for Chapter 9, hands-on activities. Like I said, we'll start those on Wednesday, and then the case study, and then also the sitemap and wireframe for everybody's final project. So keep working on that, and we'll get that finished up this week as well. All right, so let's talk about forms, HTML forms. Let's open up PowerPoint. Okay. All right, so we'll talk about common uses of forms on the web pages, how we use those. Talk about the different parts of a form. Accessibility. Okay, so there's some things we need to talk about with accessibility. Form controls, way we can group those with labels, field sets and different elements. Custom image buttons, so we can use those for buttons. We can use CSS to style the forms, so we'll talk about that. And then we'll talk about a little bit about some other HTML5 things that we can do that are kind of fairly newer to HTML5 browser support. And then after that, we'll talk about the server side and how we get these to work with the back end on the server. All right, and the different types of forms. Okay. All right, so so you see forms all over the web. You know, everything from search features, right? When you go to do a search, Google search, search on a website, those use forms. When you're inputting information, like to sign up for a newsletter, right? So all these different forms, it's a way to share information back and forth and to provide interactivity between the client side and the server side of with a website, right? So there's different types of forms, like I said, search forms, order forms, right? So whenever you go to order something from Amazon or whatever that might be, surveys, okay? So there's lots of different types of forms. They're pretty much all over the web, see them all the time. And so what it is, it's when we take it down to its basics, it's just an HTML element that contains and organizes information. Okay, so we have text boxes, check boxes, buttons that we can use to accept information from these websites that our users are on. Okay, so example here, just putting in the shipping information, right? Name, company, address, city, state, all that stuff. So that's part of a form. All right, so when we break it down, there's two components of forms when we're using those. So there's the HTML side, okay, so the front end that the user is interfacing with, okay, so that's what we're going to primarily focus on here. Is this front end side when we build the form with HTML and CSS. And then there's the server side, which is the kind of our back end processing where that information gets sent to a server, and then that usually goes into a database or some sort of a processing on the server. And usually they'll send back like a confirmation, something like that, to the user as well. All right, so the element here, when we put this into our page, we're just using form. Okay, so we're using the form element, opening, closing tag there. Configures a scrolling text box, container tag. Then we have input, right? So when we do input, we can configure a variety of different elements, including text boxes, radio buttons, check boxes, and then like submit or reset, those types of buttons as well. And then there's the text area element. Okay, so contains the form elements on a web page. Okay, it's a container tag. Select, right? This configures a select box, like a drop-down list. It's also a container tag. And then option, this is how we configure different options within the select box, and it's a container tag as well. All right, so if we look at this, just a real super simple form, just providing an email address and then 2 buttons to either sign up or reset the fields. Okay, so when we look at the syntax here, we have our form element, okay, opening, closing tags there. And then inside we have the text that's going to show up on the browser. So it's email, colon. All right, and then we start with our input tag there. Okay, so input and type equals, and here's where we tell it we want it to be a text box. We also assign a name and an ID to that input element. And then we have another input, type equals submit. So that creates that submit button. And then we have another one, type equals reset, and that's a reset button. So that'll reset that email field, okay? And then the closing form tag there, all right? So the HTML form element, so some of the different attributes for this element, there's an action, okay? This specifies the server-side script that will process that data that's in the form. There's the method. There's 2 types of methods, either get or post. Get is kind of the default value. That form data gets passed through a URL. And then the post is a little more secure type of a method. And that form data is passed in the HTTP entity body, right? So a couple different methods there. Name, that's what we use to identify the name of the form. And then ID as well. Those are things that we have to include just so the server side knows how to process that. So we include a name and the ID. All right, so when we start breaking this down a little bit, let's talk about the input text box. All right, so we have the input element there. It just accepts text information. So when we do the attributes type, we use text, okay? We include those in quotes there, so text. And then we'll assign a name, an ID, a size, max length, and value. All right, so let's look at these a little bit. So the size is how big, like how many pixels wide we want that text box to be. The max length, we can set a maximum length of characters for that text box. And then the value is what the user will input into that text box and get sent to the server. All right, another one is text area. So this is like a scrolling text box, okay? So we use the text area element. And so the attributes for this are name, ID. Okay, so we're usually gonna have name and ID on almost all of these different form elements. And this one, we can also set up the number of columns and the number of rows for that text box area. Okay, so we can make it as wide and as tall as we want. So those are some attributes that are specific to that, that element. The next one, so we have our input submit button. Okay, so when we use the input element, that will submit that form information when it's clicked. That also, what it does is it triggers that action method that we talked about. So either get or post within the form tag. and then it sends that data to the web server. Okay. So when we do that, we set up within our element area that we assign submit as the type, and of course the name, ID, and value. All right, so kind of go along with that. Usually you'll also, it's kind of best practice to include a reset button. Okay, so this is just, again, it's another button that resets all the information within the form. Okay, so somebody might be typing along and they just kind of really mess up on their information. You can provide this reset button to allow them to basically clear out all the information that they typed and kind of just start over. Another one that you would use when you have a website where you're allowing users to sign in is a password box. So again, using that input element. And then with password, the main thing that does is it hides the characters when you start typing those in to the field. Okay, so use a type attribute of password. And again, you can set the size, the max length, and the value on that as well. All right, so some of the other things that we see quite a bit on forms on the web are checkboxes. Okay, so when you use the checkbox type attribute, allows that user to select one or more groups of kind of this predetermined items. Okay, so we could set up these different items within that input field. And with the checkbox, the main thing with checkbox is you can select multiple choices there. Whereas when we go to our next one here, radio button, you'll only be able to select one item from that group. Okay, so a checkbox, user can select multiple things. Radio button is just going to be one selection. Okay, so with the radio button, we're just using the type attribute that's equals to radio. And you notice it has the little round button, and the user can only select one of those options. All right. So we can also include hidden data within our forms. So this control, it's not displayed on the web page. They can be accessed by both the client side and the server side. And sometimes we put these in here to contain information that's needed as the visitor kind of goes from page to page. Okay, so if we wanted to see like their path, if we have like a set of different forms and we need to track kind of how they're going through the site, we can include this hidden form data that the server side will see, and the people on that side can use to kind of get information that they need. But we'll just, when you do this, you include the attribute type as hidden. Okay, so select list. This is another type that you see quite a bit on different forms. It's also known as maybe like a drop-down list or a drop-down box. Okay, it allows users to select one or more items from a list. Okay, so again, this one they can we can set it up to where they can choose multiple items. All right, and so with this one, we just have to use that element of select. And with the attributes, we can assign name, ID, size, and multiple. So if we want them to be able to select multiple items, we include that attribute as well. Okay. Right, so another one, options within a select list. We can use the option element there, and we can assign attributes of value and selected. All right. So there's a lot of different things that go into these forms. And then when we start doing the practice activities, you'll get to play around with some of these different configurations. Okay, so the image button. All right, so this is kind of the same as like the submit button. All right, but when we use the image button, again, it does the same thing. It triggers that action method for the form tag, and same as submit, it sends that data to the web server. And when we do that, we'll include the type attribute as image. And then you'll see there the SRC. Okay, so we can include, like if we have a pre-designed button that we maybe build in Photoshop or something and save out as a GIF or a JPEG or PNG, we can include that source to that image file, and we can use that in place of the submit button. Okay, so just it might be something where the branding for the site you want to do like something a little bit fancier than the normal submit button. You could do it this way. All right. So that button element, it's a container tag. And then when it's clicked, it kind of just depends on the value of that type attribute. Okay. So like here, this is an example for like a sign up for a newsletter. The type equals submit, or it could be type equals reset. And then we include type button, include a name, ID, an alt description, as well as the value. All right. So we can add all these different attributes to all of these different elements. All right. So we had mentioned at the beginning accessibility. Okay. So there's some things we need to kind of keep in mind in regards to making sure our forms are accessible. So including a label element, a field set element, legend, tab index, and access key attributes. All right, so let's talk about the label element. This is used when we associate a text label with a form control. Okay, so we got two different formats here. Okay, so the first one, we have that label element, and then we say email, and then we have our email in there. And basically we're wrapping that email input text field, we're wrapping that inside the label. Okay, so this is just kind of good practice to make sure that it's accessible. And then another way we could do this is, again, we have the label for equals email, and then we have our text there that's going to show up in the browser. So email : and then we have the closing tag there for that label. And then after that, we put the our input text field down there. Okay, so there's a couple of different ways. The field set and the legend elements. Okay, so this is when we want to maybe kind of group our information a little bit in our forms. Okay, so this is especially helpful if we have a really long form that has a lot of different elements, a lot of different fields that we're wanting the user to complete. We can try to create these different groups to kind of visually put that information together. Okay, so like the example there, customer information, comments, right? You could have also like shipping information, billing, address. So all those different areas we can kind of create a field set element. And it's, again, it's a container tag, and it kind of groups those different informational items together. And then the legend element, that's again another container tag, and it creates a text label within that field set. All right, so our field set, the legend. Okay, so if we look here, we have the syntax, we have our opening field set tag. And then we have our legend, which is customer information. And so if you'll notice there on the right, the text that's kind of right above first name, last name, that's the legend. Okay, and then we have our different labels for name, right, where we have a name text field. Then we have our email, and then a text field for email, and then our closing field set element there. Okay, another one that we can do is also assign tab indexes. All right, so these are for, again, if you have a form that has quite a few different fields in it. If you want the customer to be able to just hit the tab key on their keyboard to kind of move through different fields, you can assign those values to the different fields. All right, so if we look here, we have customer email text field, and we're assigning the tab index as 1. All right, so that'll be the first one. And then if we wanted them to move then to, say, street address, we could assign tab index equals 2. Right, so when they hit the tab, if they're on email, when they hit the tab, it's going to take their cursor or the text cursor on the web page in that browser to the next field. Right, so we can kind of set up the pattern that we want customers to be able to tab through on our site, on our page. And then kind of the same thing, the access key attribute, or we call it kind of a hotkey. That's when they can use like the control and, for example, here E, that will take them directly to that field for email. Okay, so then if we had like phone number, we could assign maybe P for phone on there, and so when they hit Control P, it'll go to the phone text field. All right, so just a way to be able to let the customer move around in that form without having to use the mouse or the mouse cursor. All right, so CSS. We can use CSS to style our forms. Okay, so we'll do some activities on this on Wednesday. So if you notice there in our style sheet, we're using the form element. Okay, so we can set, for example, set a background color. We can set the fonts. We can set padding for that. And then we can also assign some styles to the label element, right? We can tell it to float left, give it a width. We can set the text align to right. Okay, so that's how we get that, like on the example here, name, email, comments, right? We get those to line up as kind of a right aligned setup. And then we can also, like for the submit buttons and the input for those text areas, we can style all of that. We can add margins and padding and all of that. So we can do this to kind of make our forms look a little bit cleaner visually, right? So assign some of those styling. That way we don't have to worry about the browser doing the styling for us on those forms. We can control that. All right. Okay, so last section here, talking about the server-side processing. And we won't really do any of the coding on the server side. Okay, we get into this in some more advanced classes in web development, where we get into kind of the back end server side. But we'll explain how it works here and kind of go from there. So kind of the way it works, kind of mentioned this earlier, but the web browser, what it does is it pulls that form up in the browser. Okay, so that front end HTML file, and what it does then, the user will fill out those fields, and the when we hit submit, it's going to go to a processing file on the server side. That server is going to process that information and then send that information into a database file, or it might even render an email to send to the organizer or the company or whoever wants that information. And then typically that server will also render out a file that will be returned to the web browser. That'll usually say something like congratulations or thank you for filling out the form, something like that, to where it sends back a response so that our user knows that their information was successfully sent, okay? And protocol for a web server to pass this request to an application program and accept information to send back to the user is usually a CGI, Common Gateway Interface. Okay, that's one way that we can think about how that information goes back and forth. All right, so on the server side, like I said, we're not going to do any coding for this, but just so you can kind of get familiar with some of the terminology here. Usually the server side will use an embedded scripting document, either PHP, ASP, active server pages, ASP.NET. There's quite a few different ones. These are just some of them. And then what these do, these scripts, they run usually on the server or through an extension module to the web server. And these are the programming languages basically that we're using to process that information. And so when we kind of the steps in utilizing the server-side processing, the web page invokes a server-side processing action by a form or hyperlink. Then the web server executes that script, and then that server-side script accesses the database or file or process or whatever it might be. And then that web server in return sends back the requested information or a confirmation of that action back to the web page that the user's seeing. Okay. All right, so why we use this, it's just a much better way to search a database, place an order, and usually with these scripts, we'll set them up in a very secure manner, okay? Because when we're working with customer information and data, we need to make sure that this data is secure as well. So we can do a lot of that through the server-side scripting. All right. So all right, so this is just a real simple, and we'll kind of use this for some of the activities that we do. So we'll see here, this opening form element tag, right? We're including method equals, and we're using the post method, and then our action equals, all right? And so this is where we're linking to that .php file on the server. Okay, so we'll use some of these kind of preset server scripts. PHP file into the browser and give a confirmation that that information was received. All right. Okay. I just got a thing that says my internet's unstable, so hopefully we can get through this. So these are some sources for free server-side processing. Okay, so these will be posted when I put the slides into Canvas, so you can look at those. Some of the technologies, like I said, there's Java, Cold Fusion. That one's kind of out of date. Don't really do a lot of Cold Fusion, but PHP is pretty common one. Ruby on Rails, Microsoft Active Server Pages. That's pretty popular one as well. All right, so last thing, some of these HTML5 things we talked about. We can. So like this one here, input, and we can assign a type as email. And when we do that, what it does is it makes sure that the information in that text box is formatted as an email address. So it usually looks for @ and then something .com or .edu or whatever it might be. So it's going to verify that that information that the user puts in is like in an email format. Okay, so this one's pretty common. We use this quite a bit. Telephone number checkbox. Okay, so we can do this for telephones. We can also, like the example here, we can include URL. Okay, we can have it format for a URL. So it looks for that HTTP ://. So again, these are just attributes that we can include that verify the formatting is correct in these different fields. Search text box, okay. Data list control. Okay, this is another one. Yeah, some of these are a little goofy. Slider. Okay, you can include the input type of range, and you can set a minimum and maximum value, and it creates like a little slider. So then when, I don't know, if you're doing like a survey or something, like give a rating between 1 and 100 or 1 and 10 or something like that. You can include that. Spinner control. Again, you can choose a range between a certain minimum, maximum amount there for that one. You just use the input type as number. Okay, so that input type is where we're getting these different controllers. Calendar control, this one might be pretty useful if you're needing, if you, for example, wanted to set up something where maybe birth date or something like that, you could use the input type date, and that will set up a calendar that the browser will render. And again, most of our browsers that we're using, 90-some% of them will be able to use these HTML5 elements. Last one here, I don't know where you would use this or why, but like a color picker. Okay, so you could use input type color, and it would create this like color selector. So just kind of a fun little element there. All right, so that is it for the slides. So I'll post these for you guys to review. Make sure you read through the book on chapter 9 to look at the information in there. And then Wednesday, we will get through, we'll be able to get through all the class activities then on Wednesday. We shouldn't have any problem getting through all of those. And then there's just a page that you're adding a form to for your case study on the Pacific Trails site. And that is about it then for that case study for this week. Okay, so read through the book to be able to take your quiz, and then we'll do the class activities on Wednesday and finish things up for this week. Alrighty, that's all I got. I'm glad my internet stayed stable. So we will see you guys on Wednesday.